Imagine a detective so sharp, so relentless, that criminals whispered his name with fear, and victims' families spoke it with hope. Imagine a man who walked into the darkest corners of a broken city and somehow always returned with answers. A detective who cracked every case thrown at him, even the ones no one else would touch. But now imagine this. One cold November afternoon, that same detective fell to the ground with a bullet in his head, and for the first time in his entire career, the trail went dark. His final case became the one mystery he could never solve, because the victim was him. This is the story of the detective who solved every case except his own murder. Baltimore has always been a city of contradictions, a place of history, energy, pride, but also of tragedy, corruption, and violence. It is a city where people grow up hearing sirens, like background music, and reading headlines that bleed with crime statistics. Amid this chaos stood a man who refused to look away. Two criminals, he was the man you prayed you'd never meet, and to his family, he was a father, a husband, and the one person they believed would always come home safe. What they didn't know was that Baltimore was about to write a chapter darker than anything Suter had ever faced. For almost 2 decades, Suter carved out a name in the homicide division. He was the kind of detective who didn't wait for clues to come to him. He dragged him out of the shadows. He had a confidence that wasn't loud, but calm, no matter where you hide. And he built a reputation that few in the department could match. But behind every case he solved, there was a truth nobody wanted to acknowledge. The longer you stare into darkness, the more darkness stares into you. And here's the twist: the deeper we go into this story, the more you'll realize that Detective Suter wasn't just solving crimes. He was walking a tightrope between justice and a system drowning in secrets that could swallow anyone whole. Because in Baltimore, crime isn't just on the streets. Sometimes, it's inside the badge. But here's where it gets even stranger. The day before he died, Detective Suter was scheduled to testify against other police officers, and less than 24 hours before stepping into that courtroom, he ended up dead in a vacant lot. Coincidence? Or something far more twisted? To understand why that moment matters, we need to go back. Back to a time when the city believed they had created their most effective weapon against crime. The Gun Trace Task Force. It was supposed to be an elite unit, a team built to take illegal guns off the streets, to dismantle gangs, to restore order. But instead of hunting criminals, the task force became criminals. Extortion, robberies, planting evidence, stealing money, taking drugs, selling drugs, covering their tracks with badges and paperwork. This wasn't corruption, it was a parallel justice system built on fear. At the time, he didn't realize what he was walking into. A routine case, a seamless topical fallback. But somewhere in that chain of events, the seeds of something dangerous were planted. Years later, those seeds would bloom into a subpoena with his name on it. A subpoena that demanded his testimony. A subpoena that placed him at the threshold of uncovering one of the most corrupt police scandals in American history. And as that courtroom date approached, pressure began to creep into Suter's life like a shadow he couldn't outrun. But to anyone watching him from the outside, Suter didn't look scared. He looked focused, determined, even calm. He had faced murderers, gang leaders, psychopaths. Testifying in a courtroom shouldn't have been the thing to shake him. But this wasn't a normal case. This wasn't a regular criminal. These were fellow officers. Men with power, men with connections. Men who had already crossed every line imaginable, and nobody knew what they were willing to do to keep their secrets buried. And then on the very eve of his testimony, Suter said he needed to revisit an old crime scene. Why that day? Why that location? And why did he go alone? On November 15th, 2017, just before sunset, Suter walked into a narrow, dirty, abandoned lot in West Baltimore. His partner waited on the other side of the street. There were no suspects, no witnesses. Panic erupted. Officers flooded the area. Radios crackled with frantic calls. And there, lying on the ground, was Detective Sean Suter, bleeding, unconscious. His radio still gripped in his hand. His weapon lay beneath him. He was rushed to the hospital. 4 hours. Doctors fought to save him. A man who survived almost 2 decades of homicide investigations. A man who walked into danger without hesitation. A man who was supposed to testify the next day. Dead from his own service weapon. In a vacant lot. Because, from the moment news of his death broke, nothing made sense. Not the location. Not the timing. Not the evidence. Not the lack of suspects. And definitely not the theories that began to flood the city. The department called it murder, but no one saw a killer. The state called it suicide, but no one believed a detective would shoot himself one day before testifying. And the people of Baltimore, they believed it was something bigger. Something darker. Something hidden between the lines of the city's corruption. But here's the most chilling part. The same unit he was about to testify against was the unit investigating his death. Investigators combed through the lot. They found 3 shell casings, all from Suter's own gun. They found no weapon other than his. They found no footprints, no fingerprints, no DNA belonging to anyone else. No signs of a struggle, no signs of a suspect. His partner just steps away, heard the shots, but saw no one running. No shadows, no movement. Nothing. How does a detective get murdered in broad daylight? Unless... Nobody was supposed to. Police commanders arguing publicly. Politicians pointing fingers. A department collapsing under pressure. And in the center of it all, some said he was killed to silence him. Some said he staged his death. Some said the truth was buried somewhere in the corruption of the department. And some believed he had been trapped in a situation with only 2 choices: die as a criminal, or die as a hero. But the people who loved him refused to believe he would take his own life. Friends described him as strong, stable, devoted. His wife said he had no fear of testifying because he had nothing to hide. His children lost their father. His city lost one of its best detectives. And still, the truth refused to surface. But what if I told you? Every theory has a piece of the truth yet. None of them tell the whole story. Investigators dug into Suter's last 24 hours. His phone records. He wasn't acting scared. He wasn't distressed. In fact, he seemed more focused than ever. Some say he looked like a man preparing for something important. A burden he couldn't talk about. A burden only he fully understood. Former officers shared whispers of things they'd heard but couldn't prove. And the more information emerged, the more complicated everything became. There was the mysterious deleted phone data the department refused to explain. The erratic lockdown of an entire neighborhood. The conflicting crime scene theories. The testimony schedules that suddenly shifted. The federal investigators who refused to take over the case. The independent review board that contradicted the medical examiner. And the constant shadow of the gun trace task force Baltimore's biggest corruption scandal looming over every detail. The deeper you dig, the more the case feels like a labyrinth with no exit. Every path leads to another question. Every answer collapses under new evidence. Every theory contradicts another. It is a story built like a puzzle, except someone took a handful of pieces and threw them into the wind. But before we unravel the final hours of his life, there's one thing you must understand. If Suter was murdered, then the killer knew exactly how to disappear. And if it was something else entirely, then the truth may be darker than either theory.